Let me take you on another walk through Berlin, but with the eyes of the Weimar Republic. Let's start with our backs to the Schlossenbrücke on Museum Island. Today, ahead of us and to the left is the Humboldt Forum, but in the 1920s, that was still the original version, although it looked pretty the same. It was the Berliner Schloss, the former imperial palace. To our right today is ESMT, a rather uninspiring East German built building, which now holds a business school. But what is interesting about it is that there is a balcony which looks very out of place, and it looks quite like the gates and balconies that are on the Humboldt Forum. And there's a good reason for that, because that's exactly what it was. That is Gate 4 from the original palace, the only surviving piece of the original palace. And it was preserved when the ruined building was torn down by the East Germans and the Soviets after the Second World War, because it was from that balcony that Karl Liebknecht had attempted to announce the formation of a communist socialist republic on the 9th of November 1918. Let us now continue to walk. We're going to walk across what was Schlossplatz, Palace Square, and in the middle of that would have been a fountain, the Neptune fountain. And that fountain still exists, but it's no longer where it was. So we'll continue across this square and across the the bridge over the Spree. And we are now leaving Museum Island and we are continuing up Rathausstrasse. It's called Rathausstrasse because it passes the Rathaus, the city hall, and you can see it on your right to this day, a grand red brick building, one of the few buildings of the era that survived relatively intact. And it's such an iconic building. It's used often for TV and movies to stand in for other buildings of its type of the era. So within Babylon Berlin, in the filming of the series of Babylon Berlin, it stands in for the Red Castle, the police presidium. To the left, you will today see a rather uninspiring, rather grey and concretey forum park called Marx Engelsplatz. But if we just continue on and pass over Spandaustrasse, you can see that there is another part of that park, and in the middle of it, that's where the Neptune fountain is. It was transplanted there by the East Germans, and you can see it to this day, and very fine it is too. Please go and have a look. But we will continue down Rathausstrasse, which in the 1920s and 30s was still being called Königstrasse, King's Street. Let's pass the TV tower, a much later construction, although it does seem to crop up in some modern movies of the Weimar period. It was actually not built until long after the Second World War. But we will get towards Alexanderplatz at the end of Königstrasse. Before we do, there is a road that just crosses us. This is New Friedrichstrasse, not particularly important or interesting street in many ways, except that for me, it is the location of where my hero lives for a number of the books within the series, the Alaric Rontrello mysteries. However, during the Weimar period, on the right-hand side of this street, there were two department stores facing each other. The first, Frau Pfingst & Co., and then on the far side, Wertheim. And Wertheim is notable because it had a particularly grand selection of windows. And these windows were the first to start having seasonal displays, particularly Christmas displays. They were noted for how grand they were, and department stores that to this day changed their displays at various seasons, particularly around Christmas, they owe it to the window dressers of Wertheim on the corner of Königstrasse and New Friedrichstrasse. Let us now go under the railway bridges that lead into Alexanderplatz station and into Alexanderplatz proper. Today, it is a pretty dull, uninspiring concretey grey square, but that doesn't get away from the grandeur of its history. So many things happened there, particularly during the early revolutionary part of the Weimar period. But let's just try and see it as it was then. If we are facing into Alexanderplatz, on our left, there would have been an enormous department store. There's actually still a department store today, but it's a fairly modern and unexciting building. Back then, there was one of the grand department stores of Berlin, and that was Hermann Tietz & Co. And facing Hermann Tietz & Co. on the other side to our right was an even larger building, one of the largest administrative office buildings in Europe, huge red brick with two great green domes. And that was the Red Castle, Police Presidium. And this juxtaposition of consumption and wealth and luxury with control and authority, in many ways to me, encapsulates the period, encapsulates the duality of Weimar Berlin. Between them, in the middle of Alexanderplatz, there was a statue. It was on a high plinth, and it was a woman with her arm outstretched in rather grand robes. And this was the Berolina. And the Berolina symbolized Berlin, much as Britannia symbolizes Britain, or Marianne symbolizes France. The statue is long gone. It's been replaced by a famous, more modern sculpture, the Weltzeitung. But the symbol of Berolina in the period really it was a fundamental one for Berliners. This was the mother iconography. The rest of Alexanderplatz stretches before us. And on the far side, there are today a number of, again, quite uninspiring buildings dating back to the East German period. But that's actually fine for us to imagine, because the buildings that were on the far side of Alexanderplatz during the Weimar period weren't grand, they weren't exciting, they weren't great palatial homes or wondrous imperial buildings. They were dingy, they were tenements, because this is the beginning of the Schönviertel. This was the lowest of the lowest class districts. This is where the refugees from the east flocked. And for that reason, it's immensely important. The politics of the period, a lot of it was politics of fear, a fear that we can recognize from modern politics, the fear of the newcomer, the fear of the refugee, the fear of people coming in and diluting your culture. And many of these people had flooded in from the east, from the collapse of the Russian Empire, the Habsburg Empire, and even the reduction, the collapse of the German Empire and the reduction in the scale of Germany. They had come from Poland as refugees from the Polish versus Soviet War, from the Baltic Civil Wars, from the Russian Civil War, the Russian Revolution, from the famine in Ukraine. They'd come out of the various different instabilities all over Central Europe as well. And they flocked to Berlin. Many of them intended to go further, whether to France, to England, or in many cases to America. And a lot of them never left Berlin. And that put a lot of pressure culturally, economically, on the eastern part of the city. And that started to colour the politics. And that's why this walk is important, because it takes us from the height of power and prestige in Schlossplatz, facing the old imperial palace, to the Schönviertel, which was the lowest of the low, the refugees. I hope you found that interesting. Subscribe for more.